I was in a Twitter war recently with a bunch of TERFs, and one of them said to me straight out, "There's no such thing as gender. There's male and female," she insisted. "Beyond that, it's a matter of individual character and personal choice. Masculine, feminine, are purely imaginary categories." I suspect this claim is as obviously true for many as it is self-evidently nonsense to many more. My response was along the lines of, it's all very well for you to believe that, because gender is like God. So many people assume its existence that insisting it's nothing but an irrelevant fairy tale just muddies the problem. Both gender and religion structure everything, from the law to how long you grow your hair. Also, if you wish to deny either gender or God, it is crucial to isolate, extricate, and respect the core truth on which each misconception is founded. But we'll get to that. I'm going to leave God for another day. Well, mostly. Because after we sort out exactly what gender is, we're going to look at the relationship between gender, integrity, and authority. Authority, if you're a little fuzzy, is the power and sometimes specifically the right to control, command, or determine. It is, in an obvious sense, the ultimate form of human power, logically entailing, as it does, the right to violence. So obviously God will get a mention, but I want to explore something that I think says more about people than about God. A network of relationships between authority, integrity, identity, power, and gender. So, what is gender? Well, I'm so glad you ask, because that is a devilish complex question. Up until the mid-20th century, the word gender was mostly only used to refer to parts of language. That is, the subclasses within a grammatical class like noun, pronoun, adjective, or verb. Word classification into a gender subclass, masculine, feminine, or neuter, was and still is allotted according to a schema that is partly arbitrary and partly metaphorical, referring, of course, to human sex. But stemming from the Latin genus, gender for hundreds of years meant sort, class, kind, or type, and only by the 15th century was it being used to refer specifically to sex as a class or type, which, if I'm not mistaken, makes it a kind of metaphor in which sex of sort refers back to sort of sex. But here's the interesting bit. The Latin comes from a Proto-Indo-European root word meaning to beget. That's the man word for having a baby. Which takes us back to what I was saying in The Politics of Penetration, my first video, about how sexual dimorphism orders the way we perceive the world. Anyway, still for another 400 or 500 years after that, gender just meant sort, class, or kind, either of word or of human. But during those 5 centuries, the emergence of the so-called Enlightenment, the growth of imperialism and industrialization, the development of democracy and the beginnings of feminism, and finally the devastating effects of 2 massive multinational wars within 30 years, all piled up on each other to create an existential crisis in Western civilization. The 20th century saw social revolutions from beginning to end, first for labour, then for women, then for the family, then against war, then for women again, then for the right to love whomever you love, and then for pure liberty of identity. And through all that, a new meaning of gender emerged, distinguishing more or less sex-based psychological, behavioural and cultural attributes from actual biological sex. A grand new abstraction. But as we stumbled towards the end of the millennium, it all started to go awry. While we were agitating for our personal freedoms, capitalism was turning us into consumers, a whole new slavery. In the West, that is, the Anglosphere and Europe, the Church, or rather churches, the religious powers of Christendom as a whole, long threatened by the advance of science, materialism and globalism, found multiple ways to push back. Patriarchy, it turned out, would not be vanquished by peaceful or even passionate protest, still less an appeal to reason. In fact, Western patriarchy, unable to permanently silence the voices of women, or indeed of those men who see its failings whether or not they perceive them in gendered terms, patriarchy survives by a shrewd mix of adaptation, coercion, deception and violence. Plenty of people are working to counter those last three. I want to look at how patriarchy, intrinsically opposed to modern ideas of social justice, has adapted to maintain majority control of Western society in the face of 20th century human rights standards. This adaptation is systemic and structural. The modern economy is built quite literally from blocks of what Raewyn Connell called hegemonic masculinity. Competitive, hierarchical, aggressive, acquisitive and invasive. Not to mention inflationary, deflationary and focused on the short term, or as we like to say, tumescent. Modern economies are structured around the traditional activities of men, which is why stockbrokers, despite their limited social value, earn so much more than childcare workers. The global economy is a masculine structure created from the exploitation of the structurally vulnerable and the rape of the earth. Can we humanize the economy by interposing the feminine? Democracy tried, socialism tried, the Green Movement is still trying. Small countries have succeeded, more or less. Larger nations, not so much. The COVID-19 pandemic, spawning new variants, dragging out for years, exhausting governments' capacity for intervention, bringing healthcare systems and economies alike to their knees, has accelerated the approach of an economic and societal collapse that loomed only distantly not so long ago. As billionaire patriarchs ready themselves to discard this resource-drained planet like an aging trophy wife, can we re-elevate the feminine? Can we recognize the repressed genius, the denied divinity, the timeless glory of that mature mother, and rebuild the world in her likeness too? Gender. It wouldn't exist but for patriarchy's rigid, exploitative, structural division of society. Subscribe to be notified of my next video, when we'll look at how patriarchy masculinizes integrity to maintain authority. I'm Jack Lorian Pascoe, and this is Philosophilia. Visit our website, find us on socials, and if you love what we do, please become a patron.